Anna Bellinghausen along with Erin Sorensen, Brandon Vogel at Big Ten Media Days, delivering you the latest Husker football coverage. Guys, we saw a lot at Big Ten Media Days between all the speakers we had. 3 players, Scott Frost as well. Lots of things stood out, but something that we want to dive into more is just what we know right now with the team, and the things that we don't know, let's avoid. But Scott Frost, he's more so on the hot seat this year. The expectations for him are to win. What can you say just about what Scott will have to go through this season and what the expectations are?
Yeah, I have to actually say it's interesting the term hot seat. Like, some people get really, they don't like that term, but he even knows. And it actually, Trev Alberts even said this during his time when he was talking at Big Ten Media Days, that he knew if he had given us the number of this many wins or what all season long, we'd be checking things off, and which I completely understand and get. But I think for a lot of people, they are interested in what those metrics look like. What is the expectation for the season ahead? But what we do know is there are expectations, there are metrics, and so that's not a surprise to anyone. So saying hot seat is not it's not a bad thing. And really the big piece of this is that they all want to start 1-0, and we heard that it started with Mark Whipple bringing up on a recent episode of Sports Nightly. It was basically I like conference games to start a season if you win them. That was the whole point, was if you win it, they're great. If you don't, well, that's not good. And that really carried over into pretty much everything we've heard so far, and I imagine we're going to keep hearing that throughout fall camp. It's going to be win that game. It's not like one win suddenly changes an entire season, but it does set you on a good path forward. I mean...
yeah, it does. I mean, I think one thing that continues to stand out to me about this season is, Frost even said it, there's always immense pressure at Nebraska. That's what it earned through its storied history of being the program that it has. And that hasn't gone away. But we know on October 1st, something changes. Something actually changes. It's not just all a theoretical discussion. The buyout comes down, the contract has already been adjusted. So there's a real tangible thing you could look at and say, this is different than any seasons in the past. So knowing that's the case, getting started with a win would be important in any year, in any country. They have to go to a different country this year to do it, which is interesting. I love bowl games. I watch all the bowl games. I also hate bowl games because they're totally alien environments where you have to go and pet an orca before you play football in some cases.
The photo of Bo Pelini just shot right into my head.
Right.
It's blazoned in there is basically what I'm saying.
I mean, it's very, very weird to everything up to that point is very regulated. It's very much the same schedule. And now everything's different. And Nebraska's going to experience that in week 1. It was interesting to me that Frost kept referring to it as a bowl game that they hadn't earned, quote unquote. And it is that. So I did get a sense that there has been messaging about both the stakes for this first game and how they're going to treat it.
I mean, the fact that it came up with Mark Whipple, like I said, it started on Sports Nightly, and it has been consistent throughout. Nebraska Nebraska walked into Big Ten Media Days last year with a messaging. They all had the same kind of I don't even remember what it was, but I remember being oh, they're all saying it. Trev was saying it. I mean, he had just taken the job, but it was consistent across the board. So it seems like that is a little bit of what we saw this year, is that it started with Whipple on a radio show. So now it's it's not just Big Ten Media Days. It seems like it's consistent, concerted effort to get them all on the same page. And I know you thought, Anna, it stood out to you that they were bringing up the one, not because it's surprising, but it just was everybody was saying kind of almost the exact same thing.
Right, every player I talked to, and I know you guys got the chance to go around as well, every player said, we want to start 1-0, every snap, every practice rep, everything they do, even sprints, they said we want to be 1-0 on our sprint. So they're really dialing it down to the micro levels of the game and everything they do in practice, which I think is great because you can't focus on the big picture if you're Nebraska. It's really about winning every single play at that moment because, again, there are those high expectations. I think Garrett Nelson said it really well. He said, instead of looking at it as a big picture, we like to focus in on what we can do every day. And he said that it's not a sense of urgency really, but it's just a sense that, hey, we need to be better. We need to focus in on every single play because you never know when one can be our last, and they want to extend the season obviously as long as possible and give the fans something to cheer about this season. So I think that was really interesting perspective from Garrett, just to really dial down to every little thing that they do in practice, and maybe that's what they were missing. You think about youth sports, it's always about touching the line. If you don't touch the line, maybe you'll lose a game down the road because you're not conditioning as hard as other teams. So maybe now they're really tying the bows on everything and making sure that's all solid and ready to go for week 0.
I will say I did see some of this commentary right after some of these comments were made at media days. People on social were like, okay, great, it's year 5. Why wasn't this the expectation in year 1? And, I have to say, that is a valid criticism. It's a valid point, and it's one that I am never going to deny anyone who asks that question, because it is, the reality is, if you could give people truth serum and say, tell me point blank why in year 5 this is the talking point, it wasn't in year 1. The reality in my mind is it probably was the expectation. It was the expectation in year 1. It's just for whatever reasons that we aren't always privy to, because of just either the access that we do or do not get. You have to kind of be. The reality is whatever was being done, in year 1, 2, 3, 4, it just hasn't worked. And so now they're banking on year 5 being it. They've made changes to the offensive staff, brought in 33 new scholarship players. It's sort of a throwing everything but the kitchen sink at the problem now. And honestly, if you can't fix it, you start to go, what is the problem? And that kind of goes back to that October 1st deadline and everything else. And, I think it's just going to be a really interesting season for a lot of reasons. And I think, like you brought up Garrett Nelson, there's so much passion involved with it. Can that passion turn into something on the field? Can that passion turn into wins? And that is the thing that I don't think Nebraska has been at a loss for passion in previous years. Right. So is it those little details? Mm-hmm. And then if it works, we can start going, well, why did it take this long? But at the same time, winning solves all.
Yeah, it does. And, Garrett Nelson is somebody who, even in the spring and again today, continues to emerge as people. I think he is the guy. There's a group of leaders on this team. And when you bring in 33 new scholarship players, that's going to be in flux. You look at quarterback. Logan Smothers has played 1 game there. Yeah. But if it's not him, if it's somebody else, it's going to be a new person. And you got to build those team bonds. And, we go back and look like it's year 5. Why wasn't this case in year 1? I think they probably thought it was the case in year 1. Yeah. Everyone's, I don't know. It's tough to prove this. I guess my default setting is I assume everybody's doing the best that they can. You don't set out to be like, well, we're just going to ignore that piece of it and hopefully it'll be fine. It hasn't been fine for Nebraska the past 4 years, so you adjust and you try to address it the best way you know how.
I do want to just offer too, when we talk about buy-in, which is always such a it's an intangible thing. You can't prove one player is or is not more bought. It's always it's subjective. You can look at somebody and go, this person is bought in, this person is not. It's often tied to it's typically tied to how much personality somebody has and how outgoing and outspoken they are. But with that said, one person that's really stood out to me, and Garrett Nelson did bring him up, was O'Shawn Mathis. He is somebody who came from TCU. To come in and kind of just step on into the situation, O'Shawn has really quote unquote bought in, but he's engaging with fans on Twitter. He's talking about how much this means to him. He's really spent the time wanting to get to know each and every person on the team, and Garrett really credited him for that. Hey, this wouldn't have been easy, but you came in, you stepped in, and you wanted to get to know everyone and be really ingrained with the program. And to hear that from somebody like Garrett Nelson, who's very if you're from Nebraska, you get it. For him to say that about somebody like O'Shawn Mathis, who isn't from Nebraska, that does say a lot.
For sure. And another point I want to bring up is Scott Frost and the coaching he'll do on the sidelines, and maybe a little bit less involved with the play calling and everything like that with his new OC that he trusts a little in the play calling. He said he still wants his hands in the pot for sure, but he's going to be a little bit more laxed on that and let Whipple really take the reins more. And maybe that was something, Erin, that was missing in the previous seasons that will be a change this year that might answer some questions of, hey, maybe if Scott's a little bit hands-off and can do the bigger picture things, work with the defense, work with the offense, and everybody, rather than maybe focusing in on the offense during games, maybe that'll be some sort of change.
Yeah, my thing is I need to see him prove it, because he did say one thing at Big Ten Media Days that I think caught a lot of people's attention. It was a very small moment, but it was kind of a moment of yes, it's not my, like, it's clear he still wants to be involved. And it's not that we ever expected him to completely go hands off, but my question is, when the going gets tough and things get hard for Nebraska, is he able to stay, removed enough where it is Whipple's offense to call and he can offer input, but he doesn't take over? That's what we have not seen yet. And what I was talking about with that little moment is, like, he basically said he's sad that he's not getting to call this offense anymore. And the reason I bring that up is not to be all conspiracy theorist or anything else. I'm just saying, we know how much he loves his offense. We know how much he likes calling an offense. And when I think about, like, what that might mean for somebody in a moment where things get heated, things get tough, your back is against the wall and you're feeling overwhelmed, does he potentially revert into, I'm the OC, I'm going to call, get out of my way? And those are those things that, like, he's going to have to show this year. We don't know the answer to that, but it stood out to me here that he, at Big Ten Media Days, that he said that. Like I said, I don't want anyone to, like, take too much that, like, I'm not, like, reading into it too much. It just is something that has sat with me through the offseason of, is Whipple truly the one making all of the calls, or when the going gets tough, does Frost step in? We don't know the answer to that yet.
Yeah, the mention of, feeling sad really stood out to me as well, because, here we are at an event in the middle of talking season, quote unquote, and, you're seeing people being like, I'm done with all that, and I get it. Like, we've had that all off season, and the games are almost here, so it's like, let's just fast forward and get to it. But that was one, if we're talking about what's different about Nebraska now, Scott Frost coming out and saying, I love offense. Like, I mean, think he was at Oregon with Chip Kelly, which revolutionized the game when they were doing what they were doing at Oregon. He went to UCF. His offense lit it up right away in year 2. It's where he's been. He's good at it. Mm-hmm. And to say, I'm going to do a little bit less of that. We still don't know exactly how this is going to work and what it will look like. To say, I'm giving that up, and I'll tell you, I'm a little bit sad about it. Well, if you're looking for some sort of change with Nebraska that we can see now, not one we can see when they actually play the games, which are the only ones that matter, that was one for me.
I do think it does stand out, though, when we think about, like, what we might see in the season, because he's never said, like you said, a tangible change. He's never said that before. He's always talked about how much the offense is his, how much he has a hand in the offense. This is the first time where he has really said, I'm taking a step back. And for him to say, I'm sad about it, like, does imply that he doesn't at least intend to overstep into that world when things get tough. Now, high pressure situations can change things, but at least it's something that stood out to me. Like I said, for anyone who's watching, like, I don't want you to misinterpret that as, like, reading too much into just one little statement. It's just something that, especially when we do talk about talking season, it stands out to you. And then you kind of file it away for later when things get tough and you're like, okay, the moment is here. What are we presented with? And then you have your answer.
I love reading too much into small things.
It's our job.
It's sort of my thing.
Look, I mean, if you want to talk about reading too much into small things, I listened to Bill Carollo, who's the Big Ten head of officials. We got really into the weeds about football uniforms, which I need to give Brandon the audio. But, like, you want to talk about reading way too much into one little thing, we got into the weeds on football uniforms. There's a lot to dive into.
Well, plenty more to dive into. Make sure you stay tuned. HailVarsity.com. Check us out on our YouTube page. We'll see you next week.